Hi everybody, Calvin here. So Studio DBJ has been pretty busy with client work lately, and as a result, Gina and I haven't had time to record our upcoming episode on what the role of talent is in success. Luckily, we have some trimmed content that we had from the previous recording that we thought was still pretty stellar, talking about copying versus inspiration. So we hope you enjoy this bonus episode, and thank you for being patient with us while we get ready for the next episode on March 16th. Today, Jean and Elie will be talking about Lorica, cosplay, cod pieces, and chainmail bikinis. This is 27, a podcast about growing up.
Swinging this over more to you, Elie. So you have clothing that is designed for like with European armor, and I also saw you start to dabble into like Asian and Chinese artwork and fabric prints as well. I guess what kind of piqued you to look into that? And then are you having any challenges in being inspired by Asian artwork and Asian armor versus European artwork and European armor?
It has been really important to me to make sure that I wasn't just upholding these same narratives of white supremacy. Europe is the best, they had the best technology, the best art, Europe forever, right? It's in all our textbooks. We have enough of that in the world, right? Especially as I struggle with the term person of color because I'm half and it's just, it's thorny. But as a person who is not all white, I just didn't want to participate in that same system, right? So it's really important to me to touch armors from all over the world, especially since every culture has some form of armor, right? The only tricky bit has been that European armor is especially good for my purposes because it is so rigid and it is so form-fitting. So the geography of the body is really the canvas for a lot of my design. The shape of the leg gives the legging its dimensionality, right?
Yeah.
So I can kind of use that trompe-l'oeil.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of Asian armors are not designed that same way. They're usually looser. They're more like sheets of things that are hung from the body as opposed to molded to the body. So that kind of makes it trickier because you can't design leggings to look like a skirt made of interlocking lamellar tiles, right? A dress might be a better application for that.
Yeah.
So I kind of have to think of the garments as mediums. Okay, which shape is going to fit this armor the best? Because it just depends. And also a lot of European armor is metallic almost across the board. Leather armor is actually kind of a lie. Sorry, Vikings, the show. Just because to get the same level of hardness in leather, it is actually so much heavier than just using the corresponding amount of metal. Just leather is dumb. Asian armors are often cloth-based, and especially Chinese armors in particular is the one that I'm the most familiar with at this moment. They usually wore a cloth garment over the armor, so you actually can't see a lot of the protective bits, the tile that's underneath. It just kind of looks like you're wearing a long shirt. So it's kind of hard to represent them accurately and also still look like armor.
Yeah. And I have to segue and say, if you have not seen the Lorica leggings yet, you have to see it. It is shockingly like armor. It is so intensely crazy. That's why when we were talking in the beginning about you got a way to make what is very standard leggings feel so custom and feel so dang, this is crazy cool, because it's weird how it shines.
Right. I'm very pleased with myself. I feel like that's an Elie signature, is that they look actually shiny.
That is a crazy thing. And it's no, it's fabric, but it's shiny. It is so weird how it's shiny.
Right. And I feel like it's when I did my first photo shoot with them, I was like, damn, girl, you pulled it off. Who would have thought?
So, there was the purpose of being able to convince your audience about this, different material translation. And so when you're thinking about your garments now with Asian and Chinese prints, you really take into consideration about what the actual original material was and really what's going to be the best form to fit it. Has there been anything that's ever discouraged you from trying something that you've been inspired by?
Sometimes I get requests from customers that I just can't honor. For example, some people are like, I would love a chainmail bikini. I think it would be so cute. It would be so sexy. And I just have to be on principle, nah. Because I grew up watching movies and playing video games where women are always in teeny tiny little metal bikinis while their male avatar counterparts are like properly armored.
Yeah.
Right, they're dressed for the battle as one might think they would be. And like, I just can't do it. Like, I know people want it and I just can't do it. I'm like, no, I don't like it. I just don't want to participate in that. There's also, I don't know if you're familiar with cod pieces. They're the part of the armor that cover the naughty bits.
Yeah.
And at a particular time, like particularly in the 16th century, like having a giant cod piece was like posturing.
It was a thing, like a reference also to like Renaissance painting. Why there are giant cod pieces, capes, and giant swords is exactly for that.
Right, one has a guess why. And people are like, why don't you include the cod pieces in your designs? And I'm like, do I have to explain to you why I just don't want like giant penises all over my work? Like, it's just not something I think is particularly interesting. And after the initial tee-hee, I'm just like, why do you care?
Yeah.
Especially since, you know, if I'm reimagining historical armors for the female body, why would we have one, right?
Yeah.
So when I was imagining Lorica as Collider, when it wasn't just going to be armor, I was also thinking about what if I did like licensed things from video games. And I eventually abandoned the idea, one, because the idea of, I wanted to do it the right way and I wanted to like get the licenses from the company, and I was like, that's going to be expensive and it's going to be hard to like find who to contact, and I'm just like, nah. But also there are other companies in this space doing exactly that thing, like making Warhammer leggings, making World of Warcraft leggings. So I just haven't pursued that bit, but it did make me think, like, what's the difference between what I do and cosplay, right? And is cosplay copying? Is cosplay inspiration? Is it authentic? And it's a question I struggle with, because initially I was like, I have so many cosplay friends and I absolutely appreciate what they do, but my first thought was immediately dismissive to say what I do is not cosplay. But the more I think about it, I'm like, well, I'm literally designing things to look as close to the original thing as I can so that people can wear it casually. So yeah, it kind of is. It's just 16th century cosplay rather than from an anime or from a video game. But I think these are still authentic objects. And I would struggle to articulate why, but it's like,
I guess like to answer that a little bit for you, why I don't feel like Lorica is cosplay at all. And I feel like it's because kind of like the story behind it is so different, where cosplay is kind of like there's a technicality that goes into like making the piece itself, and then the goal is to like emulate this one character or like to be in this one world, versus what you do, I feel like, is so much more than trying to be in this one world or the technicality behind it. It's that you're repositioning something in history to fit today, and also to like in a certain way like rewrite what people had associate armor or associate masculinity with back then.
Right. And I don't want to dismiss cosplay, because I think there's amazing artistry that goes into it, but I think you're very right to point out that it is about very directly kind of participating in a different world, a different context, a different personality, whereas perhaps what I do is more about appropriating those symbols to do your own reality, right? And it's not so much exactly recreating someone else's reality, but using those elements to create your own. But it does lend itself to me to another topic. You can totally edit it out if you want. But what makes an object authentic as opposed to like a reproduction or a copy? And this kind of goes into Jean's story. Like, if it is the same in every way, except not literally line for line, stroke for stroke, a copy, is it a copy? Right? And I find this a lot in the historical community as well, because there are so many modern armorers that are trying to replicate historical armors with modern tools, and literally like their whole goal is to make like the same thing, right? But at what point is it a reproduction, and at what point is it just an armor that was made in 2021, right? Like, what is the difference between a good copy and a copy that is so good that it is your own, right?
No, I feel like this is a really good segue in terms of like legal wise copying, you know, like there are so many design companies. What makes a design company different from something else? Like there are so many like hoverboards. What makes it different? Like it's the same thing with like Uber and Lyft, you know, like the rule of like you can't have monopoly, even though there's like this awkward way of monopolies existing in the world. But what is it that you do that you kind of basically copy, and then you find that element that makes it proprietary to you, like that makes it unique to you? The one thing I'm going to reference is Glamnetics, which are these magnetic lashes, where they're not the first magnetic lash company, but they're the first to have 6 magnets on their situation. I know, which is like, ooh, hot, cool. But that's what makes them original, and the idea itself has been done before. But what makes them proprietary is that 6 magnet claim. And that's what kind of goes into kind of like a legal aspect of like, this is why they're original. This is why they're the only thing that they do, is because that one tagline like kind of really saves it, you know, like really makes them unique and inspired by other ways of efficiency and like not getting eyelash glue all over your eyelids.
The way that I feel right now, which could 100 million% change within the next 10 minutes, honestly, is that I think that inherently by doing something, it's original to you. Whether what you added to it that was original is valuable is for other people to decide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There is no such thing as being original, and it's the intent and the execution that really makes it valuable. So I feel like the question of like, is originality valuable? No. Is execution valuable? Yes.
Yes.
Because I feel like all of Silicon Valley is going to disagree with me, but I feel like ideas are useless. Anyone can have an idea. Like ideas happen all the time. What makes it valuable is whether or not you act on it and whether or not you make it, right? So I feel like that execution is such a key component. To your Starbucks example, if it was so blatant a copy that people were literally calling this artist and being like, oh, congrats on it, it was probably pretty egregious. But at the same time, I would not say that like you can copyright a color palette. Like if I use pink and teal, it's not like someone else can be like, oh no, you took my style. Like, like there are a finite number of colors in the spectrum. And kind of to bring it back to your dance example, my best friend is a dancer, which makes me very lucky because it means I have a hot model all the time. But like she takes me to various dance shows, and there's usually like a Q&A after some of these more intimate shows. And one person asked after a particular modern performance, like, oh, was this work inspired by the works of XYZ? The answer was a poor one, but it had some merit, and because the answer was, well, people only have 2 arms and 2 legs, so how many things can you do and be original, right? I mean, like, the true answer was, like, yes, 100%, this particular artist was a cohort of X, Y, and Z, so they obviously had some amount of, like, idea diffusion. Yeah. But, like, there is some merit in the there's limitations that all of us have, which is that there are only so many colors, there are only so many directions, up, down, left, right, right? Like at a certain point we're all permutations of things that have happened in the past, and so it's just your unique combination of features that makes it yours, and I think that's fine. It doesn't have to be completely new out of the blue. I don't think anything is anymore.
No, I totally agree on that, where I'm like, when someone's like, I made this original, and I was like, no, you know, like it's not really like original, but I get where you're coming from, which is like, it's you had this kind of like brain blast moment and you want to share it with the world, but it's original, I'm not so sure. Reworked, remixed, probably, you know, and that's totally a-okay, which is sometimes why I'm like, I just wish people would say I copied this, or like I referenced this, or I remixed this. It's just, I feel like it allows the word inspire to still keep the meaning and kind of like the feeling people have when they do feel inspired, because it's like, it's a very like, you know, depending if anyone's felt inspired, but I know when I feel inspired, it's like a spark. It's kind of like I can't sleep, I'm so excited, I can just keep on going, and like my head kind of goes crazy with different ideas, you know, and then I like see like 3 years into the future. That's like what happens when I get really inspired. Calvin's like, this morning makes so much sense now. And when people are like, I was inspired by this, and they basically just copy the design. It's like, you're really discrediting the emotion that goes behind feeling inspired. And so when you just outright say, I copied this, honestly, totally fine. I think it's totally fine to just say, hey, I copied it, because unless you're trying to use it for profit, that's a different story. But if you were just inspired to make something, it's totally fine to say I was inspired to make this design, so I just copied it to practice. Credit goes to this artist, this original, as I say it again, this designer or this studio, this was the process I did use for it. There's, instead of just hoping for the recognition of the work, it's oh no, talk about what really made you want to copy that work, visually, technically, problem solving, what was it? And I think that gives more credit to you as the artist, and also gives more depth to the context of why you wanted to copy it, and then separates the line between being inspired and just wanting to copy.
Mm-hmm. Also helps with the whole question of, is it respectful, is it well done, which is that if you give credit, you can't go wrong, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily absolve you of especially in music, hey, I sampled this track from so and so, but pay me for this song, right? But credit where it's due.
Thank you, Elie, for joining us. Is there anything that you wanted to plug before I close out everything?
For sure. So it'll be a lot of repeating myself, because you can find Lorica Clothing at Lorica Clothing on Facebook. You can find Lorica Clothing at Lorica Clothing on Instagram, as well as Lorica Clothing at Lorica Clothing on Twitter, which I don't update very often because social media is hard work.
Totally, yeah.
And that's Lorica, spelled Lorica, and then clothing the way that you spell clothing.
Correct. Yeah, if there are any proper Latin people out there, I think the correct pronunciation might be Lorica, but I do not know enough, and I've said it this way for so long that it's Lorica. I'm sorry.
But yeah, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you stopping by to check out the podcast.
Yeah.
We're available on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Sign up for the Studio DBJ newsletter. You can go on our website, studiodbj.com, scroll a little bit, and then you'll get a thing that asks you if you want to join in. Subscribe to our feed for updates whenever the podcast comes out. The next episode we're going to have is in 2 weeks, and it'll be about whether or not being talented is enough to be successful. So that'll be a really interesting combo.
Yeah, super interesting.
Otherwise, we really appreciate you coming by one last time, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
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 Oh, and thank you, Elie.